It's very much a 50s picture. I mean, you know, the wonderful Anne Francis swimming in that naked suit she's wearing.
An entire civilization, 100,000 years ahead of us, wiped itself out in a single night. No war, no plague, no invasion. And the movie tells you exactly why. Almost nobody notices. You've seen this movie, The Robot.
What was great about Robbie is when he was just standing there doing nothing, he stole the show.
The Saucer, the monster you can barely make out.
Fred Wilcox, who was the director, discussed the film with everybody working on it, and he said, this is a serious film, and treat it like that.
For 70 years, we called it a fun B-movie. We were wrong. All of us. Something is hidden inside it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
We all, as actors, made it a point from the very beginning to take the story seriously and to play it for real.
Everyone remembers it wrong. A Saturday afternoon creature feature. Ray guns, a cardboard rocket, a robot named Robbie. Harmless fun. That memory is the trick. In 1956, every other science fiction movie ran the same play. A monster crawls out of the ocean, the army shoots it. We were always the victims. That was the whole genre. Then MGM asked one question nobody had asked on film before.
MGM during the 50s was one of the biggest studios around. They weren't looking for a B picture with this. They wanted this to be the first science fiction A film.
What if we're not the victims? What if we're the explorers? So for the first time in Hollywood history, humans build their own faster-than-light ship and fly to a world 23 trillion miles away. Not Mars, not the moon, another star. In one decision, science fiction stopped being about fear and started being about us. We weren't running from the dark anymore. We were walking into it. Because this forgotten little movie was quietly building something you still watch every week. But that's not even the strangest part. The strangest part is who the real star turned out to be.
One of the things that he did was he actually had sets built that were way bigger than what they had in the budget.
The star wasn't even human. He was supposed to be furniture. Robbie the Robot was written as a prop, a walking toaster to carry luggage and pour drinks. 7 feet tall, 300 pounds, and on paper about as interesting as a refrigerator. Then something happened on set that nobody planned. The design was so alive, so expressive, that this hunk of metal started stealing scenes from movie stars. Ordered to whip up 60 gallons of bourbon, Robbie doesn't just obey, he questions it with perfect deadpan timing. Told to make an evening gown, he produces one overnight with emeralds. He's helpful, but he's got standards. Watch audiences in 1956. The fan mail poured in, and not for the human stars, for the robot. MGM had accidentally built the first machine anyone ever loved. A costume with no face, no voice of its own, and more personality than the leads. Which raises a strange question. If the humans weren't the point, and the robot was just a costume with a man inside, why is it now worth more than the careers of everyone who starred beside it? The prop that outlived the stars. When the bills landed on their desks, the studio accountants nearly had a collective heart attack. Because Robbie was no cheap piece of set dressing. He'd swallowed a chunk of the budget big enough to hire another star or fund weeks of filming. All of it poured into a single costume with a man inside.
Everybody knows who Robbie the Robot is. He was probably the most unique robot ever created for a movie.
7% of the entire movie on a prop. And the executives were sure they'd been fleeced. Sure, some designer had talked them into a gimmick that audiences would forget by Christmas. Here's the thing. They had it exactly backwards. That gimmick became the smartest money MGM ever accidentally spent.
This was new for MGM. They had done fantasy films, certainly. They had done The Wizard of Oz, which would be their biggie. And they had done other fantasy films and horror films to a degree through the years, but nothing space-oriented.
Robbie's design was so far ahead of its time, it never aged, never cheapened. It gained value.
I remember that first day, the crew just stood around and looked at it and wondered, what the hell is this going to do?
Then, decades later, one of the original Robbies came up for auction. The bidding started. It climbed. And when the gavel finally fell, the number stopped the room. $5.3 million. Not adjusted for inflation, actual dollars. Sit with that. A prop from a movie everyone dismissed as kid stuff sold for more than most of the living, breathing stars beside it earned in their whole careers. The robot outlived them. It beat them. And that's the first real sign this was never an ordinary picture. Something under its surface was built to last, with the seriousness no saucer movie was supposed to have. Because when you find out where this story came from, it stops being a B movie at all. The man who wrote it borrowed from the greatest writer who ever lived.
Forbidden Planet was the first science fiction film to really step beyond the bounds of the solar system.
Secret screenwriter. Here's the one that stopped me cold when I first learned it. Forbidden Planet, flying saucers, death rays, a monster from the subconscious is William Shakespeare's The Tempest in space. Think about it.
There are so many films, science fiction films, that I saw as a kid and as a teenager that have just left indelible images. I can just go to that file and flip through it and see those pictures as if I had just seen it yesterday.
A brilliant man exiled far from the world. His innocent daughter who's never seen another human. A servant creature, Shakespeare's spirit Ariel, reborn as Robbie the Robot. Strange powers that look like magic but hide something darker. Even the story beats line up one for one. Strangers arrive, the daughter falls in love, the father's jealousy rises up as something monstrous, and in the end he has to give up his power to become human again.
Altera was the perfect virgin, and the commander was the perfect hero on the white horse.
The screenwriter never said the word Shakespeare out loud. He didn't have to. Scholars have since mapped every character and turn straight on to the Bard's final play. MGM took humanity's greatest playwright and launched him 23 trillion miles into space and told nobody.
When we as actors first walked in and they showed us the flying saucer and everything around us, we were extremely impressed by it. Loved it.
So this silly monster movie is actually a 400-year-old story about power and pride and a man who can't control what's inside him, which means the monster was never really a monster. And to understand what it actually was, you have to look at the world they built to hide it, a world that does not exist anywhere on Earth.
They modeled a great deal of the film on The Tempest, which was a la Shakespeare.
None of it was real. You're standing on an alien world, pink and orange skies, 2 moons hanging low, vast impossible architecture running to the horizon, ancient laboratories carved into the rock. None of it is real, not one frame. Every exterior was built inside a soundstage in Culver City. The sweeping vistas, matte paintings, the landscape, sets bent with forced perspective. Even the sky was painted onto giant backdrops and lit from behind to get that eerie, wrong glow. And here's the thing, that wasn't a limitation, it was a choice. They didn't fake an alien world because they were cheap. They built one because they wanted total control, something no human eye had ever seen, and they refused to leave any of it to chance.
They knew that audiences had never seen anything presented quite like this. Not at this scale. Not in a movie.
70 years later, those handmade sets still look more convincing than a lot of today's green screen. When you can't film the impossible, you build it by hand. But of everything they built on those stages, there was one thing they deliberately chose not to let you see clearly. The most important thing in the movie, the monster.
The Tempest involves a man named Prospero, perhaps the most powerful magician in the world, but also had a blind spot. He's filled with ego.
The monster you were never allowed to see. It's one of the most terrifying creatures in 1950s cinema, and you can barely make it out. Watch what it does. It tears through a foot-thick steel door like wet tissue. It kills armed men with a single swipe. It shrugs off blaster fire that would vaporize a person. And through all of it, you almost never see it clearly. That was on purpose, and the method was strange. An animator on loan from Disney drew the creature by hand on translucent sheets, then filmed it in negative so it showed up as a glowing red outline. Visible enough to horrify you, transparent enough to feel impossible. There, but not there. And here's the brilliance of it. Because your eyes can't lock onto it, your brain rushes in to finish the picture. The monster becomes whatever frightens you most. Every person in that theater was fighting a slightly different creature, the one built from their own fears. That's not a special effect, that's psychology smuggled into a science fiction movie. And here's what should bother you. The invisible monster isn't even the biggest illusion in this film. Not by a long way. Hold on to that. This thing wasn't hard to see because of a limited budget. It was hard to see because of what it was. And when the film finally tells you what it is in a single line, it stops being a monster movie and becomes something much more disturbing.
I'm a strong believer that if you can imagine something, you can make it real. And well, one thing movies do, in science fiction in particular, is that it re-allows you to see something, so it comes into your imagination.
The sound from inside your own head. Before we get to that line, listen. Even the sound of this movie was a warning, and no one had ever heard anything like it. 1956, the lights drop. The MGM lion roars. And then Nothing you know. No violins, no trumpets, no orchestra at all. Just electronic pulses, alien whistles, and tones that feel like they're crawling out of your own nervous system. A husband and wife, Louis and Bebe Barron, built the first fully electronic film score in history. No synthesizers, those didn't exist yet. So they wired up custom circuits by hand, pushed them until they burned out, and recorded the sounds as they died, then shaped the tape by hand. MGM was so unnerved they couldn't even call it music. In the credits, it's listed as electronic tonalities, because the musicians union refused to accept that a machine could make a score. But the Barrons understood the assignment. The film had to sound like the year 2257. Every hum, every shriek had to remind you that you were 23 trillion miles from home, and that something out here was not human. Notice the pattern.
Pigeon gave the picture this feel of seriousness, that it was taking itself seriously while at the same time having fun.
The same instinct that hid the monster where you couldn't quite see it also made the music something you couldn't quite name. Nothing in this film wanted to be looked at straight on. Even the sound was telling you the truth the story hadn't said out loud yet, that the real strangeness was never the planet. It was what the planet would pull out of the people who landed on it. Now, that line.
I was a stalwart, disciplined, obviously strong leading man who was dealing with this girl who did not know what her endowments actually were. And I did.
Monsters from the id, here is the line. Deep in the film, a character realizes what they're facing and says it out loud, half in horror. Monsters from the id. The id. The oldest, darkest layer of the human mind. The part beneath thought, beneath control. The part Freud said we spend our whole lives keeping chained.
I designed it so that he can do practically anything, and especially emphasize his strength and all, being a mechanical thing.
And remember the Tempest? Prospero raised a storm out of nothing but his own fury. 400 years later, a screenwriter gave that same storm a colder name. The id. Shakespeare and Freud saying the same thing across 4 centuries, and this silly monster movie quietly knew it. The monster tearing through steel doors and killing armed men isn't an alien. It never was. It's coming from a man, Dr. Morbius, from the buried rage he won't admit he feels. His mind is making it, and he doesn't even know it. Think of the moment it lands on him. The most brilliant man alive, realizing the thing hunting his friends has been inside his own skull the entire time. He built the walls, he drew every blueprint, and somewhere underneath, without his permission, he built the monster too. Once you see it, small details start to glow. In the novel released with the film, even the animals in Morbius's garden, the tiger, the deer, aren't real. They're projections.
This film was not a kid picture, although it certainly had elements that kids adored. It was far deeper than that.
He's so lonely, his mind is unconsciously creating living things just to keep him company, inventing life out of pure need and never knowing it. So the sweetest thing in the movie and the deadliest come from the same place. A human being alone with a power too big for him. That's the moment Forbidden Planet quietly stops being about a planet at all. The danger was never in the sky, it was in the skull. And to understand how terrifying that idea really is, the film shows you what it did to an entire civilization in a single night.
She has to not like Adams and fall in love with Adams. She has to love her father, then begin to mistrust her father and choose Adams over her father. That alone makes it a masterpiece of space opera.
The night a civilization killed itself. Now that opening mystery, the civilization that vanished in a single night, is finally about to make sense, and it's worse than you'd guess. Long before the humans arrived, this planet belonged to a species called the Krell, and they were magnificent, 200,000 years ahead of us. So advanced, they built a machine the size of a world, a power plant running 20 miles deep, still humming after all that time. It could turn thought into matter. Whatever a Krell imagined, the machine made real. They believed they'd earned it. They believed they'd evolved past the ugly things, past anger, past hate, past the animal in the basement of the mind. They were wrong. The night they switched the machine on, it reached into every Krell mind at once, including the part they'd spent 200,000 years pretending wasn't there, and it made that real too. Every buried rage, every hidden cruelty, given form all at once. 200,000 years of civilization gone in a single night, every last one of them killed by monsters made from their own minds. That's the real horror of Forbidden Planet, the warning under everything. The machine wasn't evil. It didn't care about their intentions at all. It simply took what was already inside them and made it enormous. Technology only amplifies what you already are. Remember that machine. We are not done with it, not by a long way. Now hold that thought, because this forgotten B movie didn't stay forgotten. It quietly went on to build the future you already know by heart.
I loved cinema inordinately, to the extent in those days you could sit down, you could go in at 2 and you come out at 10. And you weren't turfed out with a person with a torch saying, "Oi, get out," you know. As the lights went up, I would just sit and wait, or I'd go and get an ice cream and wait, and I'd see it 3 times a film.
The movie that was secretly Star Trek. A young writer named Gene Roddenberry watched Forbidden Planet and saw something nobody else did: the shape of a show, a crew of explorers, a mission to seek out new worlds, a ship that stood for humanity at its best, heading into the unknown, not to conquer, but to see. Sound familiar? Once you notice it, you can't stop. The starship C-57D becomes the Enterprise. Morbius's brilliant, dangerous isolation echoes through dozens of Star Trek episodes. Robbie's loyalty and personality clear the runway for a certain android named Data. Even the Enterprise's registration number is a quiet wink back at the C-57D. But it runs deeper than the props. Roddenberry understood why Forbidden Planet worked. The monster was never really a monster. It was about what happens when brilliant people get power they aren't ready to hold.
Well, there's a serious undertone to the film that was simply missing from other science fiction films of the period, and I think the key factor is that the characters believe their roles.
That's the DNA of the best Star Trek ever made. Without this one 1956 film, the entire future of science fiction on screen looks different. Maybe there's no Trek at all. So a movie almost everyone underestimated turns out to be the blueprint for everything that came after, which is exactly why someone later locked it in the vault, right next to Casablanca.
The effects were handled by Arnold Gillespie. He'd done Wizard of Oz, a lot of other films. It was just great because he was not a technician doing effects, he was an artist doing effects.
Locked in the vault next to Casablanca. In 2013, the Library of Congress chose Forbidden Planet for permanent preservation in the National Film Registry, reserved for films judged essential to American culture. Out of hundreds of thousands of American films ever made, only around 850 have earned that. And this robot movie sits on the shelf beside Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and The Godfather. Look at the fingerprints it left. Its electronic score opened the door for every synthesizer and film music that followed.
And I've always believed from childhood that anything is possible, but only science fiction can let you go there.
Robbie became an icon. The phrase "monsters from the id" entered the language. Those alien laboratories taught Hollywood what alien technology should look like: massive, old, beyond understanding. And the talent hiding in that cast. A young Leslie Nielsen decades before he became a comedy legend playing the Straight Arrow Commander. 2 years later, an actor would land on a planet ruled by apes. A decade after that, Kubrick would send us past Jupiter.
When MGM made Forbidden Planet, they were very smart because they went to Caltech to get a lot of the science for it. And so it was very state-of-the-art of the time.
This is the film that made studios believe science fiction could be serious, expensive, and smart. It didn't just influence the future, it gave the future permission to exist. But none of that, not the robot, not the score, not the Star Trek bloodline, is the reason it still gets under your skin. That reason is the thing it was trying to tell us all along. And in 1956, nobody was ready to hear it.
Translations and reinterpretation. And to do a science fiction take or an outer space take on the Tempest is a particularly smart idea.
What it was really trying to warn us about. So what was Forbidden Planet really about? Not the robot, the one machine in the whole film we let ourselves love. He was the face on the poster. Not the flying saucer, that was the invitation. Not even the monster you couldn't quite see. That was just the messenger. It was about the machine, and the mind that switched it on. Look again at the story. A species smarter than us.
There was all kinds of stuff there that could easily be thought of as being real technology. That was the big difference between Robbie and every movie robot before that. Robbie looked like he might work.
Builds a power that makes its every thought real, and it destroys them overnight. Not because the power was evil, but because they were unfinished. The machine simply took what was already inside them and made it godlike. Now look up from the screen. We are building that machine right now. We hand more and more of our thoughts to systems that make them real at the speed of light. We chase power we barely understand, and we tell ourselves the same thing the Krell did, that we've grown up enough to hold it. That's the warning a 1956 B movie buried under a robot and a ray gun. The danger was never the aliens. It was never out there in the dark at all. It was the thing we carry with us wherever we go. The monster in the basement of every human mind. The one the machine will make enormous the moment we're not honest about what we are.
The idea that you would have a robot who would be a friend instead of an enemy certainly was a novel one. This again comes from respect for the genre.
Everyone thought Forbidden Planet was a movie about the future. It was a movie about us. And it's only now, 70 years later, that we're finally close enough to the machine to understand what it was trying to say. So the next time you catch it on some late night channel, the saucer, the robot, that glowing monster you can't quite make out, you won't see a B movie. You'll see a warning. And you'll realize it was addressed to you.